So let's talk about the Corsair. Speaking of, balancing ships and ships needing to match their roles and stuff, the Corsair was originally sold as an explorer, but it is also a Drake ship, which people generally assume means it's more combat focused and quote unquote used by pirates. And there's a couple different angles in this conversation, in my opinion. First, you have the idea that people select ships based off of what the lore is. And the only people who can do that are people who follow lore a lot. So is it responsible for them to balance and change ships based on lore, and to what extent? But then there's also the fact that it was named an explorer and had more firepower than basically any other explorer pointed forward, on top of, the turrets that it has in terms of defense and multi-crew capabilities. So they made this change to the Corsair, basically taking some of the firepower away from the pilot, giving it to the co-pilot in a bit of a weird way. How do you react to that? What do you think of that change?
Again, it was kind of out of the blue. It was only found out by, issue council and then dragged out from there, which was weird. And it was just so random, right? Lore wise, I don't know about lore wise. I don't feel like you can balance a ship based off lore, because it's based off the gameplay, right? It's based off of how it does in the world, how it does in the universe, and how it does with so many people. If this thing is way outperforming everything out there, then obviously there has to be a change. But I don't know why they went as drastic as they did. Mm-hmm. But I was actually looking at the new numbers for the Corsair, and I feel like the change, while they took away some of the guns from the pilot, it really isn't going to be that negative to the pilot itself, because this thing's still got an astonishing amount of DPS. I mean, this thing sat at 3,100 prior, and currently with the newest PTU build, it's sitting at almost 7,900 in pilot DPS. I mean, that's insane, because they upped the amount of damage that the weapons are putting out. I mean, they were putting out 565 damage per second before. Now they're sitting at almost 1,400 damage per second on the M7As alone. So while you're losing some functionality of your ship, they're still trying to balance out how the weapons are performing. Now, that obviously probably won't be a final number. That's a lot of damage for a forward-facing explorer, right? And I think they're using that explorer title kind of loosely, because this ship is best at exploring, the inside holes of other ships.
There it is.
That's the concept of what people kind of have in their mind. It's named the Corsair, right? This ship is out there freely taking from other ships, and it's got that firepower to do so. Now, putting those two guns to the co-pilot and then not allowing them to have that be an active turret, maybe they're going to change that, but that needs to be able to move around 360 degrees, right? That's a turret. It looks like it. You can see it. It almost looks like it's designed to move completely circular.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's just a fixed forward-facing gun, no. Why would you do that? I mean, get rid of that, and just let the pilot control it, but just downsize the weapons, right? Because it doesn't make sense to have forward-facing guns and not have control over their direction. And if you don't have control over that, they can't be fixed to a co-pilot. You can't expect somebody else to pull the trigger, right? With guns like that. Missiles is different. It's just like today's, fighters. Sometimes the person behind you're flying the jet while the person behind you, can operate some of the weapon systems, right? Yeah. But forward-facing guns like that, I think they should bring that back to the pilot. Just downsize it a bit. But I mean, you got an up in the DPS. I'm surprised, and they're changing the shields on it too. The shields dropped from 100,000 to 48,000. So that's going to be the next topic on that ship.
Just to confirm, they took the control of those weapons away, but technically the pilot has more firepower because of the buff to weapons.
Yeah, so the weapons actually got a increase on DPS. Like I said, I don't know how long that's going to last, but it did go from a little under 600 DPS per shot to the M7A to a little over 1,300. Same thing for the M6As. They went from 378 to 922 DPS. So while you're losing a lot of that forward-facing weapons, I know, right? I was looking at all the changes between ships, and it looks like firepower has gone up across the board. like the Gladius was under 1,000 DPS, and now it's sitting at like 1,300. I was really surprised by that. I do the numbers all the time because that's kind of a part of what I do with my reviews, right? I go after a lot of the stats, and so I keep an eye on this very heavily. And so you're losing some of the control over those guns, but you're honestly going to have so much firepower behind the pilot seat still. It's going to be unbelievable. It's still going to be a great ship, but you got less shield now. So that's going to be pretty drastic.
Okay. So this is definitely then, it is, I mean, they're experimenting, which as they do. I agree with you though, that like the bottom should probably be a turret, but maybe they are going to then wait until the Corsair can get a larger rework to make that an actual manned turret, maybe instead of what it is now, or a remote turret. But then I both want to say they should have said something about this, but technically, is this in the game yet, or is it still just in like Evocati or PTU or something? Is it in a live build?
It's in Wave 1 now. So it's Wave 1 PTU as of last night. So it's there. It's there, and it looks like, just like the Ion, it's kind of staying. Okay. They haven't talked about reverting it yet. Even with the outcry, but probably because they're like, wait until you try it, because with that massive increase in damage, I mean, this thing's doubled in damage compared to what it was, yet you've lost some of that weapons control. Now that I might be reading that because right now those stats, even if some of that number goes to the loss of control, you're still sitting at more DPS. You're still sitting probably at around 5,000 to 6,000 DPS for the pilot still. So you're still looking at a much increased number. And so I feel like we got to really give it a shot first, even though it still sucks losing those weapons. That turret needs to be able to move, that or bring it back to the pilot. Just downgrade the size of the guns, make those M7As, make them M6As, drop the M6s to M5s, and see what that does, instead of taking away a lot of the functionality that was promised from the get-go, which sucks. I wish they would stop at the promises, because that's the problem, right? Is sooner or later they have to balance the game. And that's when everything's going to change. If people think this is where it ends with the Corsair, I mean, it's going to get worse. There's going to be a lot of ships that we have right now that are going to get pretty drastic changes, because it's got to change. It's got to change for components. It's got to change for losing the health pool, Maelstrom, all these different things. And engineering is going to make everything different. And it has to.
I think best case scenario would be if this update went live and they came out and they just said, hey, the Corsair is what it is right now. We want to update it when there's a big refactor going to the ship. We're going to turn that into a turret on the bottom. It just hasn't happened yet because we're not going to redo the geometry of the ship until it's ready.
Right. Yeah.
But we'll have to see if if they do that.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting.